Good day, everyone. I'm happy to see so many familiar faces here. Today, we will have the opportunity to hear a lecture from Professor Murat Somer. My name is Ivan Kostic. I will be today the moderator, and after the lecture that the professor will give, I will be a modest discutant. Professor Murat Somer is a professor of political sciences and international relations at Ozigin University, Istanbul. His research mainly deals with the polarization, then autocratization, democratization, also religious and state in the previous periods. He's the author of two books. First, I would recently published two books, Polarizing Politics, a Global Threat to Democracy in 2019, and as well Return to Point Zero, the Turkish-Kurdish question and how politics and ideas make empires, nations, and states in 2022. Also, today we will have opportunity to hear the thoughts of Dr. Filip Milicic, who has a PhD in political science at the Humboldt University, and currently he is a senior researcher for democracy and society, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, who enabled this whole event today, and we give in front of Institute. I want to give thanks to Friedrich Ebert that enabled this, and also please, Kirsten, if you want to give some maybe introduction remarks as well.
Here in front, so you can hear me better. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Institute. I will just refer now, from now on, I thought to the Institute, no, to Gazela Pudadrashko, to agree to today's event, to this cooperation. Thank you very much, Professor Somer, to join us here in Belgrade. You have been here since the day before yesterday. We already had some discussions about your concept of democratic erosion as a new form of autocratization in this region, but also beyond. So I find this very interesting, and I hope that we will have I'm sure we will have another good debate about your concept on the academical level, but also when it comes to practical implications of the concept. I would like to mention that we also discussed with politicians yesterday from the pro-European opposition about your concept, but also about experiences from Turkey when it comes to countering democratic erosion. Yeah, and thank you also very much to my colleague, Dr. Filip Milicic, who is working for the Competence Center for the Future of Democracy of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Vienna, to join us today and also to give your contribution. And with these few words, I'm very much looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you a lot. So, yeah, I will start. I propose that we start immediately. So, without further ado, Professor Somer. So if you, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think you can. I guess microphone is always helpful. I also would like to thank Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for this invitation, and also the Institute. Really a pleasure to be here, and also Philip, who really was also started actually this invitation. It has been very interesting, really, so far for me as well, even though a short visit. Belgrade is, of course, very interesting. This institute itself is very interesting with its history, but also the political context and being able to talk to some political actors too. Seeing how as we also try to argue in our work, that some problems, challenges that opposition actors face during democratic erosion are remarkably similar across very different contexts. And that's, I think, raises many questions, and also, I think, encourages us to really theorize what is happening while we are also inside all of this, experiencing all of this as citizens, as scholars of this phenomenon, but also scholars in this phenomenon, because we are affected, we experience it, we live it, we feel it. So it's interesting but challenging as well. So in my remarks, I will focus mainly on these actually works, in case you're interested for further reference. So I want to put it up there. And before, I'm going to focus on democratic erosion and the opposition challenges, but just very briefly about polarization also. I think it would be good to say very brief two things about our concept of polarization, because this will be important actually for later. The way we try to conceptualize polarization, and there's of course massive literature on this, is to highlight that first of all, polarization and polarizing politics is part and parcel of democracies, and it is also necessary for democracy, especially because democracies also need to change and adapt. And polarization is one way actually democratic actors achieve this. On the other hand, however, pernicious polarization we put forward is a kind of polarization we can safely say is actually harmful to democracy. Because in every polarization, political actors need to present an either-or choice to society. And that is often necessary for democracy to overcome not overcome, but address differences and move forward so that, they will, like for example, reforms are always polarizing, but reforms are necessary. And but while society is divided during a reformist polarization, even though people are separated by one cleavage, polarized around one cleavage, they still have other cross-cutting bonds that actually, which don't disappear. And the actors do not try to underestimate those cross-cutting ties. They just want to define the political field based on an either-or choice without understating or erasing these cross-cutting ties. But in pernicious polarization, we see that many political actors, they exactly do that. They really they really eliminate these. At the beginning, they don't eliminate, but they weaken. But over time, these cross-cutting ties disappear or lose really their political relevance. And that becomes actually very harmful to democracy, because society cannot come back together. And people begin to overlook authoritarian actions of their own group. They vilify the other group, and compromise becomes much more difficult even after a conflict or some kind of a difference. Okay, so so there is a debate about democracy. Is democracy in crisis in the world, which you may be familiar with? I am definitely on the side of people who argue that we have a deep problem about democracy in the world. But people who argue that, well, we shouldn't overstate this, they, of course, do this, make this argument based on a particular definition of democracy, as well as democratic erosion as well. One reason many people, like you may be familiar, like prominent scholars like Levitsky and Way, Kurt Weiland in comparative politics, they also offer, of course, evidence of this. The reason they think that this is not to be exaggerated is they identify what we call democratic backsliding or erosion with executive aggrandizement. An elected political party or leader begins to concentrate powers in the executive, either by changing the constitution or de facto, using de facto powers. That's one path of democratic erosion. But I think when this happens, democratic erosion has already started. This is actually in a kind of a consequence. And a second thing that I want to emphasize, and maybe this can be discussed. I'm very curious about what you think, is that I think there is, especially in political science, but in general, other disciplines too, there is the tendency to think that the mainstream procedural democracy, the way it is described in textbooks, is idealized as the reference taken point, taken as a reference point, ideal reference point. So democratic erosion is kind of movement away from this. So as long as procedures are followed, even if this democracy is not really responsive to people's needs, like parties are elected in free and fair elections, parliament is respectful of negotiation, debates, judiciary is independent, there is no democratic erosion, right? But this democracy may be very unresponsive to people's demands. There may be a big, so that is not seen as part of democratic erosion when you move away from this, and that is also, I think, a problem. And let me just to give you an example. Look at the Turkish case. Turkey. This is from 1950s when there was, of course, heritage from Ottoman times of democracy in Turkey, experiments, etc. But modern democracy in Turkey, beginning 1950 with the first free and fair elections. This is where we see, this is varieties of democracy, not perfect, but important indicator. You see that, both electoral democracy and liberal democracy indicators increase. And Turkey is an electoral democracy with interruptions. You see a big dip in 1980. This is when there is a different kind of autocratization happens, which is an explicit autocratization. And I would say what I mean with that. There's a military coup. And military is not trying to say that we are advancing democracy, and they say, well, we have to suspend democracy. Okay, political parties go home. We will fix things. Clear autocracy. There is dip, and then. So here we see, after that, there's in 1983, there is a return to multi-party democracy. 1987 is an important, because some politicians, old politicians that were restricted, return to politics, etc. And 1990s, here you can see, and the experts, political scientists who are behind these indicators, they are right. There is a democratization, actually. 1990s is a time of democratization in Turkey. But 1990s was a very troubled time, actually, in Turkey also. This Kurdish conflict. Yes, there is, substantive democratization as well. Women's movement, that religious minorities mobilize, a lot of things. But there is also human rights violations and also corruption. And the political parties that rotating in power not really being able to address some major problems in society, which is also rapid urbanization and economic instability, all of these things. But procedurally, it's a time of democratization. And then we see here the experts are right. From Justice and Development Party that you may be familiar, AKP party, currently also in government, rooted in political Islamism, but reinventing itself as a conservative democratic party, comes to power at the end of 2002. And after this is 1 or 2 years, both polarization, we don't see it here, both polarization and democratic erosion begins soon afterwards. After 2004, you can also see that electoral democracy, quality of electoral democracy begins to fall, quality of liberal democracy begins to fall. But executive aggrandizement happened much later. Okay, so the executive aggrandizement when in 2014, current President Erdogan is first elected, and he says, I am directly elected. We have a parliamentary system. Constitution says we are parliamentary democracy, but de facto we have transitioned to presidential system de facto. And he says that, and he's also able to say that. So to me, of course, at that time, I also said this openly, publicly, tried actually. What does that mean? That means that he's actually, in plain language, he says, I am governing unconstitutionally. Because what does it mean de facto presidential system? It means de jure, I am using powers that are not actually de jure given to me. Okay, but he doesn't say that. He says something else, which is a bit more confusing, I guess. And he doesn't face sufficient resistance from the media, civil society, parliament. Of course, I mean, the opposition political parties make big noise, everything. They shout, they yell, they try all these things, but in the end, they cannot stop it. So we see this actual democratic erosion is already at an advanced stage, okay, at that point. But executive aggrandizement is not the right point to start democratic erosion. I think the quality of democracy is not really taken into account. And quality of democracy includes a lot of things. And a lot of them are also based on self-restraint. They are not formal legal laws, but simple things like, well, if the opposition introduces a law in the parliament, even if they don't have the majority, well, you can vote no if you want, but you cannot ignore it, right? There is an opposition in the parliament. They have the right to start a discussion, introduce laws, and all of these things. When these norms of self-restraint, they kind of weaken, disappear, which started in Turkey very early on. And by using polarizing politics, they are not really incorporated into the theory conceptualization of democratic erosion. So, so I argue here that democratic erosion is, of course, it's autocratization, has similarities with other types, but it's a different mode of autocratization. Its gradual nature, the methods it uses is different. Different source of legitimacy. It happens under elected governments, and it's a very different context. That also means that the challenges are very different for opposition actors, and opposition actors are not just political parties. We were just chatting about the history of this institute. 1980s. There was no democracy. I mean, there was some pluralism, of course, in ex-Yugoslavia, but not formal democracy as we understand it. But there is this democratization challenges. Intellectuals, for example, do things, like also the intellectuals who founded this institute, I understand. So their challenges was different. It was a different world. But today, with the democratic erosion, then the challenges will also be different because it's a different animal. So I'll skip actually some things. I cannot simultaneously see the presentation, but okay. So basically, sorry, I got So it's a new autocratization, and therefore it's the new solutions. And here, the question that I want to focus is that what are the options available to opposition actors? And again, not just political parties, but we can focus maybe on them. But how do you, there are two challenges. One is, okay. I think I'm working with two different presentations, but okay, so there are so basically, how do you defeat democratic erosion? That includes actually how do you defeat polarizing politics? Because polarizing politics is one method, almost a weapon, that is typically used during democratic erosion to erode democracy. It serves two simple purposes. One, you create a base, a loyal base that actually tolerates your eroding activities. And you create a vilified opponent that that will be weakened through this vilification, and therefore will not be able to defeat you. Now, this is the incumbent side, but we can also ask the following questions, and scholars have asked this question: when there is a military coup, like happened in Turkey in 1980, happened in many other places, it's very clear what you can and what you cannot do, because there is a coercive actor in power. They restrict liberties. What can you do? It's based on repression. You can try to fight against this repression, and the risks are clear, right? You can be jailed, you can be killed. You need to think about how much power do I have, how much actually, how powerful is the incumbent. In the case of democratic erosion, it is gradual. You actually, and it doesn't eliminate democracy overnight. So actually, while this is happening, the opposition actors have a lot of opportunities. There is still a parliament, there are elections. They may not be fair, but they are competitive. You can, speak in public sphere. You can do a lot of things. So that also raises the question, shouldn't the opposition actors be part of the explanation of democratic erosion? Not necessarily meaning that they want democratic erosion. They may not. But with what they do and what they don't do or cannot do, they actually contribute to democratic erosion. And that is actually, and here there is an emerging literature, which some of you may be familiar with, focusing on opposition behavior. And my criticism of that literature so far is that it tries to produce simple binary options, and basically simply arguing that actually the opposition has a choice between institutional and extra-institutional politics, or what they sometimes call moderate and radical behavior. And the argument that, for example, in countries like Venezuela, Turkey, Thailand, opposition actors use extra-institutional radical methods that backfired and therefore deepened democratic erosion. Whereas in Colombia, for example, is argued by Laura Gamboa, that moderate methods and institutional methods were used, and therefore actually breakdown of democracy was prevented. That, of course, is a very problematic, because you are not holding many other things constant. We don't know whether the intentions of the incumbent, the level of autocratization in Colombia was the same as Venezuela or Turkey. We don't have any counterfactual with these kind of simple comparisons, whether, for example, in Venezuela, if the opposition had acted differently, democratic erosion would have been less deep or slower. So we don't have actually that counter factual. So I argue here is that I think one important difference actually that for the opposition actors during democratic erosion is that they face different uncertainties. Some of the uncertainties they face are common in all autocratizations. What are these uncertainties? They are not actually sure about the incumbent's intentions. They don't know how powerful the incumbent is. They don't know how powerful they themselves are. This kind of changes. Always there is uncertain. I mean, how successful can you become? And these are uncertainties. But one uncertainty is actually quite different. For example, take Poland 1980s. There is a communist regime, but there is also a labor movement, Solidarność, that is challenging that regime. And the regime starts opening up, like liberalization, allows some kind of elections, etc. Of course, at that time, the opposition was also thinking, well, will this really end up in democratization or not? Or if we win the elections, will they really allow us to come to power or not? All of these are uncertain. But it's very clear that this is not a democratic regime. It is actually a military communist regime that is actually opening up. Everybody knows about it. During democratic erosion, however, the incumbent continues to argue that, and it is also very typical, not only they say that there is still democracy, but they often claim that they are actually advancing democracy. And also major portions of the public also believe that. So there is a regime uncertainty about, it's a contextual uncertainty where the regime is at a particular time and or what it is becoming. And therefore, whether the opposition should stick to normal democratic methods, like speaking in the parliament, introducing a motion of censure, asking for a referendum, going to the Constitutional Court, or should they resort to extraordinary politics such as sit-ins, boycotts, maybe mass protests, and even a coup, perhaps, right? But that is not, of course, no. By the way, in terms of time, if I go too long, is how much time more do I have? Or? Yeah, okay, so we'll... so it's this uncertainty also creates this, what is the best and legitimate frame of politics? I mean, I see this even maybe in Serbia right now, that like the opposition actors, they are building coalitions. But why are they building coalitions? Just to win the election? I mean, in normal democratic politics, parties can do this, right? You know, but are they doing this to restore democracy? Like, is this a regime threat, extraordinary action to save democracy, defend democracy, or is this electoral politics? As you know, the same was also in Turkey in the May elections, when the opposition political parties established remarkable unification to defeat actual President Erdogan. So one may ask, you know, like you're saying this theoretically, but is this reality on the field? Yes, it is. I think it is very much the reality on the field. It's almost frustrating, right? Because when you talk to the political actors as well as voters, you see this uncertainty. For example, in the Turkish case, this whole coalition idea was based on extraordinary politics, because it includes right-wing political parties, left-wing political parties, pro-Kurdish political party, Turkish Nationalist Party, that would normally have no justification to come together in a coalition because they have different programs. But that was the goal, the frame behind it is actually to rebuild democracy. And they have created a program, a very detailed program about how they will rebuild democracy. What kind of a new constitution, what kind of a checks and balances, social policy, economic policy, everything. But as far as the party members were concerned, many of them never really understood this because for them, they were asking questions like, why am I in the same coalition with a right-wing political party that I have been fighting for years? This undermines our political party. Why are we sacrificing our political party? Well, this is a very fair question in normal politics, but if the goal is to save democracy, if there is no democracy, what's the point of having a political party? So it doesn't make sense, but they were still thinking in terms of the normal politics mindset. But also voters. For example, the politicians say, well, I have a hard time explaining to my voters why am I in a coalition with former members of the AKP party. We have been opposed because there have been some splits from the AKP party, and they joined actually opposition. And if you talk to those political parties, they say, for example, as far as they are concerned, democratic erosion just started in 2018. Coincidence, this is the time when they were not, they didn't get any office in the, by the chair of their political party. So they think that it just started in 2017, 2018, but other political party members think it started much earlier. And they also say that our voters don't like this, that we are actually with these other political parties, because the voters also think that, well, if there are elections, then there must be some kind of democracy. And politicians say, well, we cannot say there is no democracy anymore, even though you have seen in this curve that Turkey is now an electoral autocracy. It's no longer considered a democracy. But then the politicians say, if I say there is no democracy, then voters will not go to vote. If there is no democracy, what's the point of going? I cannot do this. So you see this confusion. And so it's real. It's not a theoretical. But the solutions offered by scholars is, I think, is problematic. So, like, for example, a motion of censure is institutional, and it's also normal politics. Basically, this institutional, extra-institutional distinction doesn't work, because some institutional opposition actions can be extraordinary or normal politics. A motion of censure is normal politics, but an impeachment, a party ban, judicial activism is extraordinary politics, but it may be necessary. Like, you cannot have judicial activism all the time. It would be against democracy. But what if you have a government that is violating the constitution? Like President Erdogan in Turkey is saying that we have a de facto presidential system now, okay? So what is the judiciary supposed to do then? Probably extraordinary politics might be more justified in that kind of way. As far as institutional is concerned, well, a sit-in is extra-institutional. Like, you know, if the activists organize a sit-in in front of the parliament, may even just trying to block something, well, that is extra-institutional, but it is also accepted in most democracies, right? I mean, in democracies, that kind of protest is kind of part of normal politics. But a coup is extra-institutional, but also extraordinary. A general strike is extraordinary. You cannot have general strike all the time. Civil disobedience. This has been suggested in Turkey, that often, why is politicians still going along with this regime? Civil disobedience is necessary. They are extraordinary politics. So, therefore, I think the main challenge for the opposition actors is not between institutional versus extra-institutional politics, or normal or radical. I mean, normal, moderate radical is very subjective anyway. I mean, you need, depends on the level of threat. You need radical action if there is a climate change. If climate change is so real and severe, can we be moderate against it? You have to be radical against it, right? So it's very subjective. So it is, it's more about finding the right frame of politics based on regime uncertainty is the real challenge for opposition actors. And coordinating based on the right balance between normal and extraordinary politics. Maybe normal politics will work, but if part of the opposition works with normal politics, but the other parts work with extraordinary frame of politics, then the voters will think, well, they are confused. What is the opposition doing? They are like, I look at the incumbent, at least I understand what they are up to. I look at the opposition, they are working with very different frames. It's confusing. They are weak. They are, yeah, they are complicated. They are confused. Okay, so I'll actually just stop. And there are lots of issues, of course, here, but I don't want to give you too much stuff. But I want to, since this is an interdisciplinary group also, that I think this raises a lot of questions. Some of them are about explaining democratic erosion and also explaining how it can be overcome. But strategic questions, I think, a lot of strategic questions, but also a lot of normative questions too, I think. That what are the responsibilities of journalists or academics? I think democratic erosion, in a way, has not been theorized that way, but usually, for example, in totalitarianism or this old type of autocratization, authoritarianism, the moral questions are discussed, like from Hannah Arendt and others. Like if you live under a repressive regime, which is clearly undemocratic, what are you supposed to do? What are your moral obligations as a citizen? And the dilemmas have been discussed and I think well understood. But what about the moral obligations, dilemmas during democratic erosion, where democracy is not abolished blatantly overnight? It's much softer. Democratic erosion is much softer. It's not like, suddenly a regime comes and, jails all the opponents and tortures them. It is, relatively speaking, more moderate, even though a lot of bad things happen. So in this kind of context, then, what are citizens supposed to do? What are civil society members supposed to do? What are academics supposed to do? And what takes for political actors, and most important, political parties are very important here because they are the most organized actors. How can they resolve these dilemmas? Agency is very important, and first they need to understand actually these dilemmas and make a choice to resolve those dilemmas. But can they actually act on these choices? Do they have the capacity as an organization, political party? Do they have this capacity? Something that emerges, in my opinion, very important is also their relationship with civil society and social movements. What I have observed is that with respect to normal politics and extraordinary politics, typically during democratic erosion, social movements, social opposition, and the political opposition, political parties, are of two very different mindsets. Civil society, social movement is much more like extraordinary politics, because they don't need votes. They don't need to go to citizens and say, look, support me in elections. Maybe that's the reason. But political parties are more ambivalent about this. So this, I think, makes then the synergy between the two. Like, even if the political parties can coordinate on some frame of politics, can they also convince the social opposition to actually put this frame of politics into implementation, into practice? Seem to be a really important, I think, area of thinking and research as well. So I will stop here and thank you. Open to discussion.
Thanks a lot, Professor Murat Somer. So now, Philip, please. I think it's not working. Just you have this here. No. I think that maybe we are recording, so yeah. Yeah, so you can say.
Okay, now it works. Thanks, Murat, for the presentation. And before I start commenting on it, I can give you a good news. At the end of September, at the Democracy Institute in Budapest, there will be exactly the workshop dealing with these dilemmas. So, with moral dilemmas of actors who are resisting autocratization, civil society, parties, particular individuals. So also maybe this is something that is interesting to you. Regarding the topic of your presentation, so basically what I see in the research, there are here $2 million questions. So one would be, why citizens support politicians who subvert democracy? And the second one would be how to detect it, how to detect erosion or autocratization before it's too late. And regarding that, I think what we are very much missing are early warning signs, so that we know when something starts. And I'm not only thinking when it starts, but even before it happens. So what do I mean by that is, when those authoritarian-minded actors are in the opposition, when they are in the position, they cannot do much damage, but maybe we should pay much more attention to their discourse when they are in the opposition. So I'm thinking about Poland, because in Poland, when PiS, before it took power, they never talked about subverting democracy. They never talked that they are going to reform the country in a way that it will weaken democracy. But what they talk about was that the judiciary is inefficient, that the judiciary is corrupt, and so on. So maybe this could be regarded as an early warning sign in future, when we have the party with, I would say, suspicious democratic credentials saying in the opposition that judiciary is corrupt and all judges are corrupt and judiciary is inefficient, that maybe when they win the power, maybe they will start implementing these policies in a way that would curtail the independence of judiciary. So that would be maybe an early warning sign even before it happens. But when they are in the government and when it starts, I also see here that we are sometimes, because these measures are so ambiguous, that we are still not sure if is this really democratic erosion, if they are really attacking democracy, or maybe it's not. So what comes to my mind is Israel. When they try to reform Supreme Court, of course, they're saying we are advancing democracy because we have here a majority in the parliament and we cannot make decisions that we want because the courts are then interfering. However, what was striking to me is the mobilization of the society, because they knew that this is far from advancing democracy. They knew this is the start of democratic erosion or even autocratization. So why did they know it? It's because of the previous experience of other countries. So there was this diffusion of information that played a very important role here. And it's not only that Netanyahu and Likud consulted with Polish and Hungarian government, but according to the civil society organization in Israel, they also consulted with their counterparts in Poland and Hungary, so that they knew what is going on, so that they knew that this is just the beginning, this is just the start. However, what I think also is important is another way of subverting democracy, and this means that they not only present it as advancing democracy, they also use other pretexts. And I think we are also missing here something, because let me give you a Serbian example. So currently in the literature, everybody is talking about, if we know what's going on, then we can fight it back. However, in Serbia, Vučić used a narrative basically saying that the country is in danger, the nation is in jeopardy, and I'm here going to save the country. And in order to save the country, I need to accumulate power in my hands. And those who are against me are traitors. The opposition they are traitors. Civil societies, they are traitors, and so on. This classic vilification of the opposition that you talked about. So maybe this is something new in Hungary or Poland or Israel, but in Serbia it's not. So 20 years ago, there was a guy with the same narrative and with the same results. But my question is, why the society didn't learn from this example? So I don't think that the diffusion of information is the sole answer. I think it's maybe the answer. Part of the answer, at least, is in the strength of the institutions. So even if you recognize that there is a danger, but you're not able to fight back, because this pretext is so strong. So, for example, I also think that the opposition actors are kind of shy in many countries to push their narrative. So my question to you would be, why do you think that, and I think it's the Turkey is the same case, why do you think when Erdogan says opposition who is for minority rights are traitors to the nation because they are pro-Kurdish? Or here, if somebody is going to say we don't need to make a compromise on the Kosovo issue, it's immediately labeled as a traitor. And then they accept this label, they do not fight back, they are silenced. Same thing in Hungary. If you're pro-immigration, then the government will silence you immediately and it weakens the opposition, and so on and so on. So why the opposition is still kind of very shy to fight back, to develop this counter-narrative, and accepts that this pretext is so powerful, and the authoritarians use it as a stick to beat the opposition and to weaken it. Thanks. And sorry, I forgot. Well, just one question more. What you mentioned, and it's really important. I'm sorry about output legitimacy of democracy. So, how do you think? How can we strengthen it? Do you think democratic innovations could be an answer to this question?
Oops. Wait. Okay, thank you, Philip, as well. So I will just briefly as well give some of my remarks. I have a lot of I read in the last couple of days some of your papers and work. So because I'm coming from a little bit different angle, dealing with similar stuff, but I'm more concentrated with Islamic political thought, Islamist movement, so on. So I dealt with the AKP and Turkey from that angle, but I don't want, of course, to go there because this is not a topic of this lecture. But it is interesting for me. This 2014, I would argue that there were also many important things why Erdogan started to behave like this. If you take the regional circumstances, especially the coup and the polarization that occurred in Egypt, Tunis, and Middle East. So, but nevertheless, so this is another topic. I'm definitely most interested in your work, and it inspired me a lot about this. What you were saying about the societal polarization, political polarization, and I will just say that, you know, there are a numerous of works that occurred in the 90s, for example, especially Hamnet and Pinch, who were saying about the historical and contextual differences that are extremely important when we are talking about societal and political polarization, and that we have to understand all of this contextualized cases because that is the only way how we can understand truly what is going on and how the polarization is going on in that particular country. So I think that there are and they are always warning about this, like that we have to be aware that some polarization in one country is have completely different reasons than at some other place. And in that sense, and having said that, I would just pose a couple of questions, so let's say, and also give some of my thoughts regarding Turkey, because you dealt mostly with Turkey, but there are definitely, and what Philip said, some similarities in Serbia, and he mentioned that for what Vučić is doing now is not something new. And I think that, this societal and political polarization that we have in Turkey, from my perspective at least, is definitely not something new. It lasts for, I would say, decades and decades. I can't forget one of the very, very striking conversation that I had a couple of years ago in Istanbul with one of the AKP intellectuals and leaders. And he said, what Erdogan is doing, Erdogan is our problem, because I was asking about this time him to leave and so on. And he said, Erdogan is our problem. Why? He's the product of us. And when I said, who are you? And because he was emphasizing this us. And then he said, he's the product of all people in Turkey who are the granddaughters, grandchildren of people, of the grandmothers and grandfathers who were, persecuted under the Ataturk regime and so on and so on. So, from the point of the view of this, let's say, Islamist or AKP thinking, this polarization goes very deep down into the history, like it is decades and decades of, we can say, the polarization. And again, when we are aware of this fact, or let's say at least how they look at this and how they are framing it, this is something we can say is more or less, I won't say completely the same, but there are, some things in Serbia that reminds on that as well, some very deep polarization in this society, definitely on the identitarian, on the identity level, and so on and so on. So and then you are mentioning as well, and this is now the question, because I think that, and I was active, by the way, during the 90s here in the period of Slobodan Milosevic, very active. And I think that, that the most, the best example in politics is that you active depolarizing strategy, I think. You call it like this, and you are giving an example of 2019 and Radical Love campaign and so on. And by the way, that was at least on the level of city level of Istanbul, the victory came. Yeah. So in that sense, I think that and it's similar in Serbia. The Slobodan Milosevic was defeated when the whole, let's say what you said, political landscape gathered and, make one front against the Slobodan Milosevic, in 2000. So I think, and now again, we had, you mentioned this as how would feel someone from the, let's say, leftist and so on, regarding you mentioned the AKP, who left AKP and so on. I think this is the best moment for me. In that moment, I was thinking, oh my God, now they can win. Because, for example, when Davutoglu and all the guys went and joined this oppositional bloc against Erdogan in the last elections, I thought that this can lead to winning, and to bring down the Erdogan. And I think, so my question is, so what are your thoughts about this? Because you were writing about this active depolarizing strategy, and what do you think about this strategy? And also, what are your thoughts about the future and how can it last? And also, one more very important question, question can be, you were also writing about this, that there has to be something more that they have to offer, at least some, for example, economical reform or something else, not only like this, we are against him, we are, like restoring the democracy, but we have to also offer something additional thing. So what do you think that this additional thing can be? And also, is it manageable to do if we take into account these very striking differences that we have when we are talking about this broad opposition? Okay. Of course, I'm sorry. Of course, please engage and pose the questions.
So yeah, I'll try to be brief about these really very good questions. Thank you to both of you, actually, so that we can also then have more engagement. These are very good questions. So, Philip, your first question about early warning signs. There is diffusion of information, but why can't opposition actors in Israel, Turkey, or elsewhere read these early warning signs and stop it there, right? Because I think early warning signs are seen by many actors, especially alarmists, but the reaction to that, or what people think the option available to them is criticize and oppose the procedural violations of the incumbent. Okay, so what is it? And that makes completely sense in an old autocratization context. You can say that, look, Milosevic, this is not democracy. Okay, you are not acting democratically. So, but in democratic erosion context, especially exactly because of regime uncertainty, it becomes very questionable about these procedural violations. Okay, and many people agree, and then like you can also sometimes overcome some procedural violations, but they don't change the fact that there is this process leading to autocratization. You just fix one policy or postpone one policy. What needs to be done is actually the solution to democratic erosion when we see the early warning signs is politics. Opposition actors, and that may also include actually some international actors also, who see the threat, the problem in Israel, Turkey, or wherever. At that time, they need to redefine politics on a different axis, not on the axis that, for example, the incumbent is polarizing society, which may be in the Turkey, like you gave examples that it's very much constructed this religious secular thing. You know, we have to remake Turkey by eliminating the old elites, and we have to an axis. Redefine politics based on a cross-cutting axis, which may be economic justice, which may be something else. This is what political actors need to find in cooperation with, with social movements, and politically stop it. So what I'm arguing is that seeing the early warning signs and challenging what is happening procedurally doesn't work very well in democratic erosion contexts. So we can discuss further. The second question, can democratic innovation be the answer? Yes, I very much think so. I think, and you also, I think, mentioned that democratic innovation needs to be, I think, following on the steps of people like Charles Tilly, I mean, who also introduced more process-oriented definitions of democracy, for example. I think this is the direction in which they have been going, I think. It's not about just these fixed procedures, democracy, but in terms of, for example, whatever is happening at the institutional political elite level, is this democracy, for example, responsive? And there is, of course, measurement issues, and it's a subjective concept, but it's a very important concept. Is it really responsive to people? Is there a meaningful interaction between citizens and state, the politics? Is democracy able to solve the problems? That is actually how we should define a democracy, and also assess the level of democracy. And democratic innovation is necessary because I think in a lot of areas, I think some of them are more discussed, like how can we facilitate citizen participation by using technology, all of these things. But I think it goes much more beyond that. I think we need to, for example, I think we need to engage in big questions also, because behind all of this there is also a troubling relationship between capitalism and democracy, for example, that we see, an inequality. Okay, I mean, and we don't have this capitalism democracy marriage that worked in the Second World War context for a long time by more or less creating fair societies, where everybody was getting more or less fair share, is no longer the case. So democratic politics has to also innovate on these issues. What kind of economic institutions, state institutions can rebuild that relationship? About Turkey, what is often confused, like this, you asked this issue, and also with this your conversation with the AKP, pro-AKP intellectual. This is nothing new. This animosity or conflict between religion and secularism goes all the way to the Ataturk time, and persecution of the religious orders. People often confuse conflict and cleavage with polarization. Clearly, of course, I mean, this is very well-known fact. There has been, Turkey is also, built, formed based on a revolution. In a comparative context, it's a very soft revolution. I mean, compared to Mexican Revolution, where hundreds of thousands were persecuted, the whole land of the church was expropriated by the state. Compared to that, of course, Ataturk's revolution is a, very soft revolution. You can look at how many people have been executed or punished, or how much, like this, also in terms of property relationships, with the religious orders and everything. But it's a revolution. Of course, it hurt people. It hurt some people, especially religious orders. And this has been a conflict. But this was not a linchpin of polarization. It was not a very salient issue for a long time. So what actually this intellectual is a very good example of how actually polarizing politics works. It has been, the AKP has redefined political field, constructed the political field in such a way that that conflict suddenly began to be the linchpin of everything. Okay, us versus them, and this is what divisive, and everything else doesn't matter. And at the beginning in 2003, it was not like that. This discourse was introduced, but it took a long time for that to dominate the public discourse. I mean, like right now in Turkey, for example, in the government controlled media, the kind of discussions you see are actually, I mean, you can become honestly sick psychologically just by listening to them. But it would be completely unimaginable 15 years ago. People will say, "Are you crazy? This doesn't make sense." Okay, but it has become mainstream. So this is actually like this is the process, and of course, you know, yeah. As far as May 2023 is concerned, I think is to me a very good example of actually what I'm actually trying to actually say here, because first of all, I mean, I agree with you. It was also like people as well as international observers, also people in Turkey. They were very hopeful. I mean, this looked like also a very big opportunity to actually defeat Erdogan electorally. And on the surface, opposition actors did everything right. Like, I mean, they basically came together, like extraordinary politics. CHP, the center-left Republican Party, center-right conservative parties, Davutoğlu, Felicity Party, Political Islamist Party, which is part of Erbakan's party, which, you know, like, they all go together. They established this program, very detailed program about what they will do afterwards. Fielded joint candidate. But, like I was saying during my remarks, as far as voters and, you know, the political parties were concerned, they were still not at home with extraordinary politics. For them, it was, for some people, it was an electoral coalition. For others, it was a democracy coalition. Actually, even the name tells you this, because many people, like including myself as well, I mean, we said, call it democracy. No, they called it, what was it? Improved parliamentary system coalition, which nobody really understood, because they don't. The pro-Kurdish party called it democracy coalition. So they could not agree on this. And as far as voters are concerned, still there was this problem. Politicians were complaining, voters were complaining. Why is my party coalescing with a party across the aisle in the ideological scale? Why are we cooperating with ex-AKP political parties? So that, I think, led to a lot of practical problems. That how they could not explain to the public very clearly what they were trying to do. In the eyes of the voters, it looked like very confusing and chaotic. They had a joint presidential field candidate, 6 deputies under the president, 6 political parties. So what are they doing? Why are they together? On paper, it was very detailed explained, but you have to give a very clear signal to the voters. So this extraordinary democratic politics was not really understood. And I think in the end, they lost with 2 percentage points. They got more than 48%, like, you know, whether it's failure or not was kind of relative. So that's, I think, that is really the reason. For the future, I think the first kind of like impact of this has been, I think, for the political parties really to interpret all of this the wrong way. Right now, all political parties, they said, we will now really fight for ourselves. Rather than more unity or coordination, right now they all actually reject this because they thought that was the least important area. But the May 31st elections will be actually key. Local elections and Istanbul election will be the signal. If the opposition wins the election in the city, that will define the politics the next 10-15 years.
Okay, thank you a lot for your answers. So now we have a lot of questions. I see already. Of course. Thank you, Gazela. Yelena.
Thank you very much for the lecture, and thank Philip as well. So at the end of your talk, so we hear that political opposition and also other oppositional actors, and they're really under a lot of pressure, you know, because we all expect them to behave in a certain way in a very unfavorable context. So it's kind of a hybrid moment. Some elements of democracy are there, but obviously the autocratic work in the autocratic. So the question is, what kind of strategy should they apply, how they should behave, what? So it's really a lot of pressure. But that, what about this other element that is crucial for your talk, but at one point it got lost, and that's the role and the importance of polarization, right? Because and I think it's very important that you do that, you make the distinction between cleavages and polarization, because cleavages do exist, and obviously they are in a way healthy for every society to be there. And then the autocratic leaders and the autocratic politicians, they make polarizing issues around some important cleavages. But then the question is, how should the opposition behave in this atmosphere of polarizing discourses? Because, for instance, here in Serbia, we all often hear accusations of the opposition, how it is contributing to the maintenance of polarizing discourses, you know. But we forget that they operate in this. It's those who are in power, they are the agenda setters, you know, and they created these polarizing discourses as it's their modus operandi, and then you have to act within those discourses. And so it's a lot of expectation from the political position to be the ones kind of try to moderate them, to tone them down. And it's also sometimes it's impossible, because you don't want to necessarily negotiate with your opponent if your opponent is an autocrat. You want to see them behind the bars. You don't want to negotiate with them. So of course you're polarizing the issues. So that's really, how should the opposition behave in terms of polarizing discourses, especially in terms of also political strategies? Because you said, and I think it's very important, in order to achieve a victory or any kind of political success, it's not enough just to be against the autocrat. You have to offer something new. And this is really important for new political actors. For instance, here in Serbia, we for the first time have some kind of new left actors, and you have to build your identity. You have to build your new political identity. And if you make these grand coalitions, this gets lost. And also, if you're trying to tone down polarizing issues, you don't have the opportunity to build your political identity. So it's a very tricky thing. How should the oppositional actors, not only opposition, but also other social movements, civil society, should they really be the ones to tone down the polarizing issues, or should we push some issues? Should we actually radicalize some issues even more, because it's in the maybe that's beneficial for restoring democracy? Thank you.
Philip, so shall we collect the questions or go one by? Okay, so Philip now.
Okay, thank you very much for the lecture. I happened to be in Turkey, in Istanbul, in 2012-2013 when the Gezi Park protests took place, and that was the first chance for me to see how many let's call, I mean, one might call them political cleavages, but also social cleavages, and these lines of dividing society exist in Turkey. So on those protests, you could see, I don't know, Kemal Atatürk's flags, you could see Deniz Gezmir's flags. So you could see clearly that there are several lines of division. So secular versus clerical, maybe also Kurdish versus Turkish. But taking into account, if we take into account that Turkey also has a rich left-wing history throughout the 70s, etc., we know that Turkey indeed has many political cleavages within itself. And autocratization often, in my view, plays on that ground of stability, especially in such complex contexts. So we have many lines of division. Let's stabilize the country. And in case of Turkey, if a country plays such an important role internationally, plays such an important role in the Middle East, plays such an important role in the so-called migration crisis, what we need is not division, is not, but we need stability. And this is the, you spoke a little bit about sources of legitimization for autocratic regimes. I think that this scenario applies to Turkey, applies to Serbia, applies to Russia, applies to many other places. So my question would be, how do you challenge from this oppositional side this stability, non-stability issue, and how do you address and challenge this argument on the side of autocrats? That's the first question. And the second question is, you mentioned that Erdogan said that Turkey is now de facto presidential system. And this is, in my view, this is a logical inconsistency in parliamentary systems where presidents are elected by popular vote. And I mean, logically, this person who gets elected president de facto has the greatest legitimacy. I mean, many parliamentary systems do not have direct elections for presidents precisely because they don't want to individualize power. I mean, they don't want to give a chance to an individual to get so many, you know, in the case of Turkey, dozens of millions of votes. Right. So would that what needs to be done in Turkey so that this also constitutional thing changes? Whether there were some calls from the oppositional side for that to happen? And going back to the first question, to what extent Erdogan actually managed to provide stability in Turkey? Especially since the early 2000s, I mean, he was the first one who got some agreement with Öcalan, right, and PKK. And now with the coup in 2016, there is a new cleavage between Gülenists and pro-Erdogan people. So things are getting more and more complex for Turkey, and I think that this stability argument actually plays for him in this situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. So, Professor.
Yeah, again, thank you for these great questions. So, I mean, starting, I mean, with the polarization idea, and thank you actually for bringing this, because, of course, I would like to emphasize that, but in the presentation, it got lost a little bit, maybe. It depends on the so what should oppositions do against a polarizing incumbent in a polarized context? It depends on the context. There are we defined 4 actual categories: either passive depolarization or active depolarization, or reciprocal polarization, or transformative polarization. It is so, as far as depolarizing, so the opposition can say we're just gonna reject polarization. I think passive polarization has the least chance of working, I think, because you're legitimizing an autocrat, like you said, also, right? You cannot just basically, when an autocrat is being an autocrat, just so you can. But active depolarization can work sometimes, It worked in 2019 Istanbul elections and in many other metropolitan areas because this is a local election, and the incumbent is using polarization to create a united bloc against you, right? And you're basically breaking up that barrier actively. Basically, whatever prejudice or the negative image the incumbent has created around you, you're rejecting it. Look, yeah, I'm not against religion. I'm not against conservative people. I'm not against, I don't know, whatever is the context. But I'm not sure in national elections, national politics, how much it can work. So to me, and of course, reciprocal polarization will just deepen polarization. So transformative repolarization is I think, is the most promising option. But that needs to be implemented very well. So transformative repolarization is that the opposition also offers an either-or choice to the public, but based on an axis different from the one that the incumbent has politicized and vilified, used for vilification. You give an either-or choice like, look, this is the kind of Serbia we want, a democratic Serbia, and this is our program, this is what we will do. You're either with us, if not, the alternative is, I don't know, autocracy or an unjust system or whatsoever. And you're also not vilifying the other side, but it is polarization because you're giving an either-or choice. And you're also not ignoring that there are all these cross-cutting ties and everything. But you have to give this reformist transformative. So in Chile, for example, I think that they tried to do this actually, but I think here, I think the key issue is that you need to find the right axis to polarize the society. Whatever cleavage, it can be a new cleavage, like a new constitution, Boric tried to do in Chile. But that needs to be the right one that will actually unite a winning majority. So in Chile, for example, Boric tried to do that, but the constitution somehow they tried to introduce twice was not the one that would get the support of a winning majority, right? So that is the key. But if they can find the right axis, in the Turkish case, they kind of tried to do this. I don't know how much actually political actors understood. They tried to do this on a democracy-autocracy axis. But again, like there were these problems that they didn't want to call it democracy coalition, and there were all these problems that I mentioned. But that's what I think. As far as I think it's a very good question that what are the options, obligations of social movements, civil society are concerned, what they are supposed to do. I think are more or less, I think, similar to the political parties, except that here, I think their organization is much more different. There is no organization hierarchy in social movements to actually make that choice and then, speak for the social movement and enforce that decision. Therefore, I think it is very crucial, this relationship between political parties and the social movements, which is very problematic. We know all this literature about, parties have become cartelized all over the world. I mean, not all over the world, but, like in Europe is a big problem. That is a problem. It's part of the problem. They cannot actually activate the social movements. They cannot interact either. And in general, in social movements, they are much more in favor of extraordinary politics, but that's also because they are not asking anybody's votes. It's easier for them to, how you become popular in a social movement is quite different from how you become successful in politics. Gezi protests, I actually read a bit, being from Turkey, I might have interpret it a little bit more differently. Like what stood out in Gezi protests was that, and this is quite unique in Turkish political history, that very different political factions came together. And especially at the beginning, it was very promising that it also seemed to overcome this religious secular division. That there were there were Ramadan feasts among secularists and also Islamists together, and they were in the same Maidan, and like leftists, right wing, etc. I mean, this plurality, I mean, this is what we need in democracy. But however, of course, this different political factions, if you want to prevent an autocrat to come and dominate the political field, of course, these different political factions, they should be able to really create a functioning democracy. And there have been problems about that in Turkey, that many like left-wing movements, they always had this zero-sum kind of type of politics, too rigid. So all of these things can be discussed. But I don't see Gezi protests as an example of that. It was for me, it was a really big opportunity to overcome that, actually.
I didn't mean that the protests were the example of like visions. It's just that I saw many parts of society coming together at the protest, but I was aware that these outside of the Gezi protests, these are still cleavages. I mean, that there is still, that's what I meant.
Yeah. Cleavages are good in democracy. We want cleavages. We want them to express themselves, but just not vilify the others, of course. The stability question is actually, I think, very interesting, very important. I think that you're very right. There are two answers to that. On one hand, the stability argument is very manipulative. Because this stability argument that is made by these eroding incumbents, including in Turkey, if you unpack it, I mean, it is actually an argument against politics and against democracy, right? Because what is described as unstable is basically, for example, governments changing, right? And it can be quite successful, because for some ordinary citizens, it makes sense, but it is against politics. For the kind of like parochial citizen who actually doesn't follow politics very well and is confused about all these discussions in politics, what are they doing in parliament? Why are these governments changing? You know, it makes sense to that, but that's also dangerous, of course. But on the other hand, I think, so was Erdogan time stable? Hell no. I never had so many crises in my life. I mean, I don't know the one before that well either, but the things in 2010, I wrote an article, a book chapter, and this is 2010. I read it sometimes in retrospect, very funny. I read, what happened in the last 3 months in Turkey could not happen in many countries. So many crises, like the beginning paragraph. And I read this paragraph, this was nothing. This was nothing, you know, like compared to today. But on the other hand, there is one stability. Yes, AKP has remained in power. We can say that, of course, the other political parties that could not, I mean, the responsibility of civil society, social movements, and political parties, opposition, in the opposition, their responsibility is to offer a stable alternative, democratic alternative. So you can say that why couldn't they stop this erosion? And also the democracy before AKP in Turkey was also not very stable. So I think political parties at that time, they're also responsible for like creating a fertile ground for a party like the AKP to emerge. So
we have one more question.
Thanks a lot for the super interesting talk. I have two questions related to kind of, I liked your kind of, your talk as an analytical framework. I would like to challenge you whether it's also useful as a kind of, prescription for action. And on two dimensions, kind of, where I would be kind of, interested to learn a bit more. One, you did the distinction between normal politics and extraordinary politics. And the basket of extraordinary politics was very heterogeneous, but kind of, I think you made a good argument why in kind of, some situations, kind of, civil society resorts to extraordinary politics. Now, the way how I perceive a lot of these competitive authoritarian, semi-authoritarian kind of, regimes, they actually very much rely on the notion of extraordinary situations, and that also legitimates kind of, the backsliding, the kind of, the destruction of kind of, institutions. And if the opposition or the civil society resorts to extraordinary means as well, for good reasons, don't they only kind of, legitimate, kind of, allow the regime as well to kind of, to resort to extraordinary means and to further deteriorate kind of, the democratic situation? And the second kind of, category which you used was kind of, or analytical framework which you used was this question of opposition unity and cross-cutting cleavages, which would allow to create opposition kind of, unity, which is an argument which was very important in the literature of the 2000s, which was analyzing kind of, the colored revolutions and other cases of kind of, democratizations, kind of, through elections, which were always kind of, successful as a result of united oppositions. But then in the 2010s and 2020s, it's used as a prescription, and everybody is always telling, kind of, you need to have a united opposition. If not, you can kind of, not get rid of the regime. And it never happened to function. It didn't happen to function in Hungary. It didn't happen to function in Serbia. It didn't happen to function in Turkey. Apart from Budapest, the only case where it kind of, helped was in Poland, because you had this super kind of, antagonizing kind of, abortion law, which was passed by the kind of, by the populist, conservative kind of, party. So my question kind of, to you would be, as much as I kind of, believe that it's helpful as an analytical category, can it also kind of, work as a policy prescription? Kind of, what the opposition should do? Or should we rather think of kind of, that maybe there are simply some conditions which lead to opposition unity and which allow then the opposition to win, and other conditions where it's impossible, and for very good reasons, if we are kind of, trying to kind of, to get this unity, nobody will ever vote for this opposition, because kind of, you don't want to vote as a liberal for a fascist, and you don't want to vote as a fascist for a liberal, and so kind of, the opposition unity simply kind of, is an illusion.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, this is really two really great questions. Can extraordinary politics really justify more government authoritarianism? Because you're very right, of course. I mean, the eroding incumbents always use this argument of extraordinary threat. We have to be authoritarian because there is some kind of a. So you're very right. Every strategy has a cost, of course, but if you you have to compare it to the alternative. I mean, if democracy is being eroded, okay, I mean, you have to use some extraordinary political response. I mean, I think otherwise, I think you will. Well, I don't like. My argument is that the most important thing is that for the opposition actors to agree on a common strategy. Maybe, especially at early stages, I think normal political strategies have more potential to work. But there, also, however, if they are not coordinating on that, if part of the opposition is extraordinary, using extraordinary frame of politics, and part normal, it will not work because of the reason you said, because the government will still say, look, the opposition is using extraordinary language, or they are threatening, and then this normal behavior will also not work, therefore. But if they can unite on normal behavior, yeah, I think at earlier stages can work. But at later stages, I think we see examples of this so frequently. I mean, once these eroding incumbents collect sufficient power, they basically find so many ways to ignore normal opposition behavior. And the control of the media is very critical, in my opinion, here. They can, even though the opposition is acting using normal politics, and the government is just basically negating what the opposition is doing undemocratically, the public may not learn about what is going on because the media is at that point manipulated, controlled by the government. Extraordinary democratic politics. So they have to unite on a strategy of extraordinary politics, but that also has to be really, it has to be very clear. It has to have the upper hand in this claim to democratic legitimacy. Extraordinary, but democratic. And that's why political organization is also very important, because how do you prevent different groups within the opposition from using maybe undemocratic methods when you mobilize the opposition around the extraordinary politics? You have to make sure that, for example, some groups will not become violent and also do try to stage a coup or something like that. That takes actually political organization. About since 2000s, the tens. I'm not a opposition unification fetishist. So I agree with you. Like, it's not like, okay, opposition has to unite and that will be the answer all the time. No, I agree with you. To me, it is more important is this coordination over the right frame of politics is more important than actual unification. In Poland, for example, before the elections, the political parties did not form a coalition. They competed as separate political parties. But they had made an agreement before the election. If we have the majority, we will actually work together in order to restore democracy. That is much more important, I think, than actual unification. In some contexts, maybe they will form a pre-electoral coalition. In others, maybe they will not, post-electoral coalition. But the most important is that they come to an agreement. Why are we cooperating? For what purpose? And which frame we will use to explain this to the public. That's, I think, is the most important issue. But thanks, actually, really, for those questions.
Okay, I think that there are no more questions. So thank you all once more, and thank you, Professor Somer, a lot for your more than interesting and inspiring lecture and answers. Okay, thank you all, and hope to see you soon.